Have you ever noticed a lion doesn't roar before it strikes? The most dangerous one in the room isn't the loudest. It's the quiet one. The one who doesn't argue, doesn't explain, doesn't flinch, just stands still and watches. You see, in a world where people talk to be heard, where volume and emotion are confused with strength, we've forgotten what real power feels like. It's not loud. It's not chaotic. Real power is unreadable, composed, quiet. And that's exactly why it's terrifying. Because when people can't predict you, they can't control you. And when they can't control you, they start to fear you. That's the paradox of true strength. The moment you stop reacting, when you stop giving them access to your emotions, they lose their grip on you. You become untouchable, not because you fought harder, but because you chose stillness over struggle. This video isn't about empty motivation. It's about becoming a force of nature, silent, grounded, unshakable. We're going to dive deep into 6 internal states drawn from ancient Stoic philosophy. These aren't tricks. They aren't power poses. They're disciplines of the mind designed to create presence so powerful it speaks before you do. You won't need to shout to be respected. You won't need to fight to win. Because when you build calm so deep it unsettles others, the room shifts before you even open your mouth. Let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone whose silence made you nervous? Not because they were cold, but because they were clear. They weren't trying to impress anyone. They weren't performing. They just were. Still, focused, unbothered, and somehow that made everyone else a little less certain of themselves. That's the energy we're going to cultivate today. Not by pretending, not by forcing anything, but by learning to master the one thing no one else can touch: your inner state. The Stoics called it apatheia, freedom from disturbance. Not numbness, not indifference, but the unshakable clarity to choose your response, not react to theirs. So if you're tired of being pulled into chaos, if you're ready to walk into any room and hold your ground without raising your voice, stay with me. Because strength doesn't start with action. It starts with presence. And presence, real presence, is built in silence. Let me ask you a simple question. What's your first instinct when someone insults you? Do you defend yourself? Fire back. Try to prove your worth. You're not alone. Most people respond that way out of reflex. It's human. Someone pushes, we push back. Someone mocks us, we explain. Someone disrespects us, we raise our voice. But here's the truth, that's not power. That's control, just not yours. When someone else can trigger your emotions, like flipping a switch, you've already handed them control of the room. You've given them your energy, your peace, your center. And that's exactly what they want. The Stoics, those ancient warriors of inner strength, had a different way. They taught that freedom begins the moment you stop reacting to everything that's thrown at you. Because when you react, you reveal your weaknesses. But when you stay silent, you reveal their fear. Silence isn't retreat. It's a strategy. It makes your enemy uncomfortable. It removes their power to predict you. And what people can't predict, they can't control. And what they can't control terrifies them. Imagine this: someone tries to provoke you in public. They expect you to snap, to argue, to lash out. But instead you say nothing. You don't flinch. You don't even blink. You just look back with calm presence. What happens next? They start questioning everything. Did you not hear them? Do you not care? Are you planning something worse? Their mind fills in the silence with their own insecurities, and that's the point. Your stillness becomes a mirror reflecting their inner chaos. It's psychological judo. They came looking for a reaction. You gave them none. They came for your peace. You gave them stillness, and now they're exposed. Because you didn't fight on their terms, you stayed grounded in yours. There's a story I'll never forget. A man, quiet, unassuming, worked in a high-pressure office. One day during a big meeting, a coworker tried to publicly humiliate him, called him outdated, laughed at his ideas. Everyone in the room froze, waiting for his reaction. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He simply looked up, met the man's eyes, and said calmly, "Are you finished?" Then went right back to his work. The room went silent, and that silence didn't say, "I'm afraid." It said, "You don't move me. You don't get to decide who I am." That's real strength, the kind of presence that doesn't need to prove anything, the kind of man who wins the battle without even stepping into the arena. Why? Because he mastered the one thing most people never do: his reaction. So let me ask you again, what do you do when someone insults you? When someone pokes at your pride, will you take the bait or will you practice the art of stillness? Because when you stop responding to every attack, you don't become weak. You become unpredictable. And in a world addicted to control, unpredictability is power. That's why silence, when chosen consciously, is the strongest strike you can make. And the next time someone tries to shake you, remember this: they want your reaction. Don't give it to them. Give them your silence instead, and watch who really walks away with the power. Epictetus once said something that could change your life. It's not what happens to you that matters. It's how you react to it. Think about that for a moment. We live in a world where people are constantly reacting. A comment, a look, a delay, a rejection. All it takes is a spark and boom, our peace goes up in flames. But here's the Stoic truth. The moment you let someone dictate your reaction, they win. They don't even need to hurt you physically. They just need to shake your emotions. If they can pull you into their chaos, they don't need control, because they already own you from within. But imagine this. You're in a meeting. It's tense. People are talking over each other. Suddenly someone tries to embarrass you. Maybe they call your ideas outdated. Maybe they laugh at your experience. All eyes turn to you, waiting for the drama, the defense, the fire. But instead of reacting, you do something unexpected. You turn to them calmly and ask, "Are you finished?" Then you return to your notes and keep working like nothing happened. That moment isn't weakness, it's total terrifying control. Because what your enemy wanted was chaos, a performance. But instead you gave them a mirror, and in it they saw their own insecurity, their own hunger for attention, their own lack of power. That's what stillness does. It doesn't fight, it exposes, and the truth is, most people aren't ready to see themselves so clearly. That's why they react loudly to hide what's inside. But when you don't flinch, when you don't feed their fire, they're left standing in the silence of their own discomfort. That's not just Stoic wisdom. That's real strength. Let me be clear, this doesn't mean you let people walk all over you. It doesn't mean you ignore injustice. But it means you choose how and when to respond. You own the pause between stimulus and reaction. And in that pause is your power. Here's the part most people miss. Stillness doesn't say, "I don't care." It says, "I won't be moved." And that subtle shift changes everything. Because when your stillness is intentional, when it's rooted in self-respect, not fear, it creates presence. It commands the room without raising your voice. And it terrifies those who are used to manipulating through noise. So let me ask you, when someone disrespects you, what do you want more, revenge or respect? Because the man who snaps back may win the moment, but the one who stays silent wins the war. He doesn't lose his peace, he doesn't lose his power, he becomes untouchable. That's what the Stoics taught us, not just to stay quiet, but to become so grounded that no insult can uproot us. Because when your dignity is no longer dependent on someone else's behavior, you're free. And the man who is free is the one they fear the most. There's a certain kind of person who walks into a room and the room quiets down, not because they demanded it, not because they yelled or bragged or tried to prove anything, but because their presence speaks louder than their words ever could. You've seen someone like this before, haven't you? They're the ones who don't compete for attention. They don't rush to speak or fill the air with noise. They simply sit still, breathe slow, observe, and in doing so, they control the space around them without ever asking for it. That right there is real power. And yet, in today's world, we're taught to do the opposite. Be louder, be bolder, promote yourself, prove yourself, show up, speak out, make sure people know your worth. But the Stoics, especially Marcus Aurelius, believed something radically different. He once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." In other words, when someone attacks you, you don't stoop to their level. You don't mimic their noise or match their chaos. You rise above it quietly, gracefully, without needing anyone to notice. That's not weakness, that's self-mastery. Because when you know your worth, you don't have to shout. When you are secure in your values, you don't have to convince anyone. And when your presence is rooted in peace, not ego, that's when people start to feel your power. Let me tell you a story. There was a man I once worked with. Nothing about him screamed power. He didn't wear expensive suits. He didn't dominate conversations. He rarely even raised his voice. But whenever he walked into a meeting, the tone of the entire room would shift. People would lower their voices. They'd sit up straighter. They'd pause before speaking. Why? Because his stillness was commanding. Because even in silence, he was present completely unshakably. And that made everyone else pay attention. He didn't intimidate. He didn't perform. He just embodied calm clarity. And in that clarity was strength. Here's the truth. People fear what they can't predict, and they respect what they can't rattle. The loudest person in the room may draw eyes for a moment, but it's the quiet, grounded one, the one who doesn't need to be seen to be felt, that leaves the lasting impression. It's a paradox. You become most powerful the moment you stop trying to prove that you are. This is what modern Stoicism is all about. It's not about suppressing your emotions. It's about refining your energy. It's about knowing when to act, when to speak, and when to simply let your presence do the talking. So ask yourself, are you exhausting yourself, trying to be heard? Or are you becoming someone worth listening to even in silence? The real work isn't in broadcasting your greatness. It's in becoming someone who doesn't need to. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you shared too much and regretted it? Maybe it was a vulnerable moment. Maybe you opened up to someone you thought you could trust, only to watch that information come back later, twisted, used, or misunderstood. It happens more than we realize, and the Stoics warned us about this a long time ago. Not everything known should be spoken. Not every thought should be shared. You see, there's a hidden power in privacy. In a world obsessed with transparency, loud opinions, and personal branding, the person who guards their inner life becomes unpredictable, and that unpredictability, that's where fear begins. Let me tell you a story. There was a man named Caleb. At first glance, there was nothing particularly intimidating about him. He was soft-spoken, calm, never the loudest in the room, never the center of attention. But there was something else, something you couldn't quite put your finger on. He never overshared. When people asked about his goals, he gave vague but polite answers. When someone tried to dig into his personal life, he smiled gently, redirected the conversation. He wasn't cold, he was composed. He was precise with what he allowed others to see. And over time, that made him unreadable. People couldn't figure out what made him angry, what made him tick, what his insecurities were, if he had any at all. And because they couldn't decode him, they couldn't control him. That's the secret most people never learn. When you reveal too much of yourself, your weaknesses, your patterns, your habits, you give people a map. And in the wrong hands, that map becomes a weapon. The Stoics understood this deeply. Seneca once said, "It is a great thing to know the season for speech and the season for silence." In other words, wisdom isn't just about what you say, it's knowing when not to say it. Because once your emotions are visible, Once your insecurities are known, you become movable. But when you maintain that sacred space between who you are and what people think they know, you become something else entirely, a mystery. And people fear mysteries because they can't predict you. And if they can't predict you, they can't prepare for you. And if they can't prepare for you, they can't control you. Now let's be clear. This isn't about lying. It's not about deception or manipulation. It's about strategic silence. It's about refusing to hand your power to those who haven't earned your trust. It's about preserving your energy, not performing for every room you're in. Some people will call it being cold. Others will say you're too distant. But deep down, they'll respect it. And they'll fear it, because your self-containment reminds them of everything they gave away too easily. Caleb never changed who he was. He just refused to let people read him like an open book. And in doing so, he became a fortress one no one knew how to invade. He didn't wear masks. He just knew which rooms deserved his truth and which didn't. So the next time someone pushes you to overshare, pause. Ask yourself, is this information going to serve my peace or sabotage it? You don't owe access to everyone. You don't owe your full story to people who haven't earned a single sentence. Hold some of yourself back, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Because a man who can't be read, can't be shaken, can't be played, and most importantly, can't be stopped. Have you ever noticed something? The loudest people in the room, the ones who talk the most, promise the most, boast the most. They're often the ones with the least to show when it really matters. They announce every move. They post every plan. They seek applause before the work is even done. And yet, at the end of the day, it's not their noise we remember. It's the results of the one who never said a word. Let me tell you about Samira. She wasn't flashy. She didn't speak just to be heard. While others in her office were constantly pitching, posturing, talking about what's next, Samira stayed focused on what was. No grand declarations, no public vision boards, no need to explain her worth. She just worked, quietly, relentlessly, with precision, and for a while, no one noticed her. In meetings, she didn't interrupt. She didn't chase attention. She didn't try to sell herself like a product. And because of that, some people made the mistake of underestimating her. They thought she was soft, passive, forgettable. Until one day something changed. Her name came up in a boardroom discussion attached to a project that had quietly saved the company millions. While everyone else was busy sounding important, Samira had actually become important, and by the time they realized it, she was already gone. Promoted, transferred, elevated beyond the noise. She had outpaced them before they even knew there was a race. That is the power of silent action. It doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't seek validation. It doesn't warn people of what's coming. It just arrives. And when it does, it speaks louder than any speech ever could. The Stoics had a word for this. It wasn't passivity. It was dignity. A deep, disciplined commitment to embody your values before you ever speak them. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it." In other words, stop telling people who you are. Show them. Not with loud gestures, not with grandiose plans, but with the kind of results that leave no room for doubt. You don't need to broadcast your every move. You don't need to narrate your journey like a reality show. In fact, the more you talk about it, the more you open yourself to resistance, judgment, and sabotage. But when you act in silence, when your growth is internal, your progress steady, your mission quiet, you become unstoppable. Because by the time the world notices, it's already too late to stop you. Think about it. What's more powerful? The man who says, "I'm going to change everything," or the one who already did and didn't say a word about it? Which one do you respect more? We live in a time where people confuse attention with achievement. But they're not the same. Anyone can get attention. Few can produce results, and those who do rarely feel the need to announce it, because results don't need applause. They carry their own weight. Let me ask you something personal. How often do you feel pressure to prove yourself? To show the world what you're working on, what you're building, what you're dreaming about? And how often does that pressure come not from your goals, but from your ego? It's a subtle trap. The need to be seen can distract you from becoming someone worth seeing. So if you truly want to be a force, if you want to build something meaningful, lasting, powerful, then take a page from Samira. Shut the door, do the work, let the silence become your momentum. And when you do speak, let your results echo louder than any promise ever could. Because in the end, the world doesn't reward noise. It rewards transformation. And the people who transform things the most often speak the least. So stop announcing, start executing. Don't chase applause. Build something that doesn't need it. Because when you move in silence, you don't just avoid resistance, you create awe. They won't fear what you said you'd do. They'll fear what you might do next. That's the essence of still power. And in a world of constant talking, that kind of quiet is deafening. Let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone who didn't try to fit in, didn't try to impress, didn't even seem to care if people liked them, and yet you couldn't stop watching them? That's Jace. He doesn't shrink himself to make others feel comfortable. He doesn't water down his opinions. And he sure doesn't say yes when he means no. He walks into a room, speaks with quiet conviction, and holds eye contact just a moment longer than most are comfortable with. Not because he's arrogant, not because he's trying to dominate, but because he's whole, because he doesn't need approval. And here's the truth that makes some people uneasy. Wholeness intimidates the fragmented. People like Jace don't bend to expectations. They don't flatter to gain favor. They don't fake harmony for the sake of being accepted. And because of that, others often feel exposed in their presence. Why? Because when you're around someone who isn't trying to please you, you're forced to face the part of you that is still begging to be liked. And that can be uncomfortable. But here's the catch. This isn't about being rude. It's not about being cold or rebellious for the sake of it. It's about self-respect. It's about honoring your own truth more than the fleeting comfort of fitting in. The Stoics had a word for this: eudaimonia, living in alignment with your inner spirit. Marcus Aurelius said, "The approval of others is a poor substitute for your own integrity." In other words, why live for applause when you can live in truth? You see, we're taught from an early age to seek approval, to be polite, to be agreeable, to play nice even when something inside us is screaming, "This isn't right." But every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you bite your tongue to avoid discomfort, you lose a little piece of yourself. And here's the tragedy. Most people will never notice. They'll just take what you give and ask for more. That's why Jace stopped playing that game. He realized that the price of constant people-pleasing is self-erasure, and he made a different choice. Not to offend, not to isolate, but to show up as himself fully, firmly, and without apology. And guess what? At first, people pulled away. They called him difficult, cold, even arrogant. But over time, they started to respect him. Because while everyone else was chasing likes, Jace was building something rare, authentic presence. That's the paradox of real power. When you no longer need people to like you, you become magnetic. You become someone they look to for clarity, for honesty, for strength. And the best part, you sleep peacefully. Because you're no longer performing, you're just being. Let this be your reminder. You don't owe anyone a watered-down version of yourself. You don't have to smile when you're hurt. You don't have to say yes to stay safe. Your power is not in how agreeable you are. Your power is in your authenticity, in your ability to live in alignment with your values, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Because the people who truly belong in your life won't ask you to shrink. They'll meet you in your fullness. They'll rise to match your energy. And those who don't, let them walk. You were never meant to live your life in pieces, just so others could feel whole. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You don't have to argue to prove a point. And you certainly don't have to explain yourself just to earn a seat at the table. The most powerful person in the room is often the quietest. Why? Because real power isn't loud, it's not flashy, it's not desperate for attention, it simply is. It's the energy of presence, the kind of presence that speaks without speaking, the kind that shifts the air when you walk in. Not because you demand respect, but because you embody it. The modern world trains us to chase validation, to explain ourselves constantly, to overshare, to prove our worth. But the Stoics saw things differently. They believed that when you're rooted in your values, when your actions reflect your inner truth, you become undeniable. You stop trying to be understood. You stop asking for permission. You stop waiting to be seen. You simply move like a force of nature. And here's the part no one tells you. That kind of stillness, that kind of certainty makes people uncomfortable. Because when they can't read you, they can't control you. When they can't trigger you, they can't use you. That's when you become pressure, not because you're trying to dominate, but because you're no longer shrinking to fit. Let me say it plainly. You don't owe the world your explanations. You don't need to justify your peace. You don't have to apologize for growing out of the roles others trapped you in. You are not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to live in alignment, to move forward in silence, with integrity, with clarity, with power. So if this message speaks to something deep inside you, if you're tired of explaining, pleasing, or proving, then drop a comment below with this affirmation: I no longer explain, I just move. Because that's where the shift begins. And if you're ready to keep rising, to walk the quiet path of inner strength and presence, subscribe to the channel. Not to follow a trend, but to step out of the crowd and finally walk as yourself. Still, clear, unapologetically powerful.